I hope the title got your attention. You're probably wondering, hey, what's that all about, Kent? $12 or $2,400? Well, let's talk about this a little bit. And as we get onto this video, it'll become very obvious what I'm trying to say here. This car belongs to my nephew, and he recently had a little problem and took it into a shop, and they told him that he would need to spend $2,400 to fix the problem. And he said, well, gee, that's a lot of money. And, you know, he says, hey, Uncle, would you check this car out and just make sure they're telling me the right thing? So first off, let's talk about what the problem was and then what the diagnosis was by this shop. While I start the car, keep a close eye on these engine warning lights. Look at that, they all go out except this one right here, and you should know what that one means. It means low coolant level. When that light comes on, if it comes on your dash, you rightly should be concerned, and it was a good idea that he at least had it checked out. But when he took it in the shop, they looked it over, and they came back and said, well, it looks like you're losing engine coolant, and it probably, you know, we're going to have to replace the water pump and the head gasket. And so that's what the $2,400 quote was for, was to replace those two components. And, you know, they're both quite labor intensive, so the price for the work wasn't that far out of line. But the question was the work really needed? So I got poking around. You know, once again, when you're troubleshooting these things, go with the simple thing first. And the first thing I did was just, you know, take the coolant reservoir tank cap off and look down in there, and I'm thinking, wow, you know, there's coolant in there. Remember the sensor's right down here towards the bottom of the tank. There's a sensor that reads, it's like a little float sensor, and it reads, you know, when the coolant level gets below that, it'll break connection and you'll have a warning light come on. Well, I'm thinking, okay, what's going on here? So I thought, you know, maybe there's not a problem here. Or maybe there was some coolant loss and, you know, maybe the shop put the coolant in, but still, the coolant level is okay and that warning light's coming on. So what I did is I drove the car a couple times, and each time I drove it, I would bring it back, get it real hot, and put some cardboard underneath the engine and just let it sit for about an hour, and then come back and kind of analyze where the drips were coming from. And guess what? No drips. Cardboard was totally dry. And I did this twice, thinking, well, I've seen inconsistent coolant leaks coming out of water pumps before. Like they'll leak and then they'll stop leaking. Maybe you got a little bearing play in there and the seal is not seating quite right. So I didn't want to give up on that. But after that second time, I said, hey, you know, this engine is not losing coolant out of the head or out of the water pump. If it's losing it anywhere, you know, by the way, take a look at this shot. The cap for the tank was really in bad shape. It was grooved and there was corrosion around the ridge. So I said, okay, right away we're gonna replace that cap and clean that lip up. But the more I thought about this, I said, you know, I think it's gonna be something cheap here, and let me show you what the problem really was. Here's the location of the coolant level sensors. Right here, it's held on with this snap ring. What I did is I unplugged it first, and I noticed there was quite a bit of corrosion here. So the first thing I did was clean off the corrosion, plug it back in. I went back and tried it, and the light still stayed on. So what I did is, you know, these things, they just wear out after 20 years, and a lot of times it's just better. They're so inexpensive that I went ahead and ordered one in, and let me show you how I hook it up and just did a quick test. This is what this little float sensor looks like. It sits down in the bottom of the tank, and of course when the coolant level comes up, it just comes up and makes contact like that. So what I can do is I can just take and plug this in here I'll turn it upside down like that so it's acting like it's floating. Now let's go take a look inside the car. We'll start this thing up again and see if that light goes away. Okay, let's keep a close eye on that indicator light again. Look at that, it went out. That means, that confirms, yes, we do have a bad sensor. Other than losing coolant out of his cap here, there's one other place this car could be mysteriously losing engine coolant, and it's right down here in this window washer tank. Yes, that's right. You can leak coolant into that. Let me explain. These cars have a heater. It's actually a heater coil that goes down in the tank, and that is supplied with hot water to heat the window washer fluid. And these are very prone. The little element at the end will start leaking. It's not a big leak, but just enough to start losing coolant. And then when you use the window squirters, you know, you're going to say, wow, that's kind of oily on my windshield. So that's one of the first signs. But I'm looking down in this tank here, and it doesn't look like window washer fluid. So let me tell you what I'm going to do. I'm not going to show you because it's fairly simple, but because we're in the Pacific Northwest, it doesn't really get that cold that much up here. I'm going to just disconnect and remove the heating element. That means I will find a fitting and just connect these two small hoses together and clamp them off, and then we'll just completely remove the heating coil from the window washer tank. And that will eliminate one more potential problem. Even if it's not leaking that much now, it might be leaking quite a bit later, and I don't think he's going to need a heating element there. So, what's the moral of the story? I think it's fairly obvious. In fact, I'm a little bit on a campaign here, because if you watch my other video series on repairing the transmission in my 2000 E320 wagon, you recall that I bought the car because the owner had been quoted $6,000 or $7,000 to repair a faulty shifting transmission, and it only cost me $380. And I'm seeing this over and over and over again. I recently had a friend tell me they took their Volvo in, they said it was going to need a head gasket, they quoted $3,500, and after having somebody else look at it, it was just a crack in the radiator. So, owner beware. If you're not going to be willing to pay attention and to learn a little bit about your car, you may end up paying. And in this case, the owner, my nephew, had somebody he could go to get a second opinion. By all means, get a second opinion or a third opinion. Be very careful about getting upsold on these head gasket replacements or major engine repairs, particularly if the car's not worth it. I mean, a lot of these old cars, when you think about here's what happens. You get into a head gasket replacement. The next thing you know, the shop's calling you up and say, well, you really need new motor mounts. And by the way, we got a problem over here and you need to get a new tensioner and of course the water pump. And before you know it, it's $4,000 or $5,000 and you have a car that's only worth $3,000 or $4,000. So at some point you need to be careful, and I will continue. This might be part one of a very large multi-part series, because as I see more and more of these type of problems crop up, I'm going to come back and report to you on what I found, and hopefully those examples will help you save a lot of money, because do the mental math. Obviously this would have cost more than $12 if he would have taken it into a shop, but if he bought the part and did it himself, maybe with a fit, maybe $20, $25 at the most. I mean, I'm sure he's going to be really happy when he hears that I fixed this car for $25 instead of $2,400.